Before we descend into the smokestacks and shadows of 1979, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden histories of the Cold War and the ordinary people who found themselves on the front lines of an invisible conflict, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The history books often leave out the most interesting details, and we are here to find them. The noise of the stamping press was a physical thing. It was a rhythmic, earth-shaking thud that lived in the chest of every man and woman on the floor of the Sterling Heavy Manufacturing Plant in Dayton, Ohio. It was late October 1979. The air outside was turning crisp, smelling of burning leaves and approaching winter. But inside the plant, the air was permanent, a cocktail of ozone, hydraulic fluid, and stale coffee. Frank Miller sat at his station in the quality assurance cage, a wire mesh enclosure that offered the illusion of separation from the chaotic floor. Frank was 42, a man composed of sharp angles and wire-rimmed glasses, with the kind of patience that made him invisible to the loud personalities that dominated the factory. He wasn't a manager, and he wasn't a line worker. He was the final set of eyes. Nothing left the Sterling plant, which manufactured industrial air compressors and hydraulic pumps for everything from tractors to municipal water systems, without Frank's signature. His world was a binary one, pass or fail, within tolerance or out of spec. It was a life of measurements, taken with micrometers and calipers, a life where 1/1000th of an inch was the difference between a job well done and a safety hazard. That Tuesday began like 1,000 Tuesdays before it. The shift whistle had blown at 7. The coffee in the break room vending machine was watery. The gossip on the floor was about the rising price of gas and the football game from the previous Sunday. Frank had a stack of operating manuals on his desk. These were the Model 88K high-flow pump manuals, freshly printed from the localized print shop the company used downtown. His job was to spot-check them for printing errors, smudged ink, missing pages, binding glue failures, before they were shrink-wrapped with the heavy iron units destined for export. Sterling had recently secured a contract to export these pumps to several non-aligned nations in Eastern Europe, a deal that management was particularly proud of. It was part of the détente, the opening of trade. But to Frank, it just meant the manuals had to be perfect. A missing page in a manual sent to Wisconsin was a nuisance. A missing page in a manual sent to Belgrade was an international contract violation. He picked up the 43rd manual from the crate. He fanned the pages, the smell of fresh ink rising up to meet him. Page 1, clear. Table of contents, aligned. He moved through the safety warnings, the installation diagrams, the troubleshooting guide. Then he stopped at page 14. Page 14 was a wall of text describing the pressure valve release protocols. It was dull, technical reading, but Frank's eyes didn't catch on the words. They caught on the space between the words. Frank had been a typesetter for a local newspaper in his 20s, before the paper folded and he moved into manufacturing. He knew kerning. He knew the flow of a justified paragraph. The typesetting on page 14 was wrong. It wasn't messy, it was deliberate. In the third paragraph, the space between valve and actuation was a fraction of a millimeter too wide. 2 lines down, the space between primary and coupling was compressed, the letters nearly touching. To anyone else, it was just a cheap printing job. But Frank knew the print shop Sterling used. They used modern photo typesetting machines. They didn't make mistakes like this. This wasn't a mechanical failure of the press. The layout had been manually adjusted. He frowned, adjusting his glasses. He pulled the next manual from the stack. Page 14, the same irregular spacing. He pulled a third, identical. He pulled a manual from a box that had been printed the previous month for the domestic market. The same pump, just the English-only version for American buyers. He flipped to page 14. The spacing was perfect. The text flowed smoothly, adhering to standard typographic rules. Frank felt a strange, prickly sensation at the back of his neck. It was the feeling he got when a caliper reading didn't make sense, the instinct that said, dig deeper. He took the export manual and held it up to the fluorescent light. The irregular spaces didn't look like accidents. They looked like a rhythm. Wide, narrow, wide, wide, narrow. He looked around the factory floor. The forklift drivers were shouting over the din. The foreman, a heavy-set man named Kowalski, was arguing with a welder near the bay doors. No one was looking at Frank. No one cared about a printing error on page 14 of a boring technical manual. Frank slipped the export manual into his lunch pail. It was a small infraction, technically theft of company property, but in that moment the curiosity outweighed the rulebook. He needed to look at this in the quiet of his own home. He needed to understand why a machine printed in Dayton, Ohio, destined for the other side of the Iron Curtain, had a stutter in its voice. Frank's house was a bungalow on the south side of town, filled with the silence of a man who lived alone. His wife, Sarah, had passed 5 years prior, and his children were grown and moved away to the coasts. The house was a museum of his habits. The ham radio in the den that he rarely turned on anymore. The stack of Scientific American magazines in the bathroom. The well-oiled tools in the garage. He ate a cold sandwich over the sink, his mind still back in the cage at the factory. At 6 p.m. he cleared the kitchen table, wiped down the oilcloth cover, and laid the manual down. He placed a magnifying glass, a notepad, and a pencil next to it. Under the harsh light of the kitchen chandelier, the anomaly on page 14 looked even more aggressive. Frank opened the manual to the page. He started with the first sentence of the third paragraph. Ensure that the primary valve is sealed before rotation. Between primary and valve, there was an extra click of space. He marked it down on his notepad. Wide. Next line. Rotation of the central casing requires. Between central and casing, the space was tight. Narrow. Frank worked for 2 hours. He went through the entire page, cataloging every instance where the spacing deviated from the standard. When he was done, he had a string of data. Wide, wide, narrow, wide, normal, normal, narrow, wide. It looked like binary code, or perhaps Morse code. Frank knew Morse from his ham radio days. If wide was a dash and narrow was a dot and normal was a separator, he began to translate. Dash, dash, dot. That was G. Dot, dash. That was A. Dot, dash, dot, dot. L, G, A, L. He continued, his pencil scratching rapidly against the paper. The silence of the house was heavy, pressing in against the windows. The wind rattled the screen door, but Frank didn't look up. He was deciphering a message that had been hidden in plain sight. A message printed by the thousands. Gallery, Gallery, Fox, Fox, NINE, 9, SUNDAY. Sunday. Frank sat back, rubbing his eyes. Gallery Fox 9. Sunday. It didn't make sense. It wasn't a sentence. It was a string of nouns and numbers, a code within a code. He looked at the manual again. Why would this be here? These manuals were printed in Dayton. They were boxed with pumps that weighed 2 tons. They were put on trains, then ships. They were going to places like Yugoslavia, Poland, and Hungary. If someone in Dayton wanted to send a message to someone in Warsaw, this was a terribly inefficient way to do it. It would take months for the cargo to arrive, unless the message wasn't for the receiver in Europe. Frank stood up and paced the small kitchen. The linoleum was cool through his socks. He thought about the logistics chain. The manuals were printed at City Press, a commercial outfit on 3rd Street. They were delivered to Sterling Heavy Industries. They sat in the warehouse for a few days. Then they were packed. Maybe the message wasn't meant to leave the country. Maybe the message was meant for someone inside the Sterling plant, or someone in the shipping department, or maybe it was meant for someone at the port in Baltimore. Gallery Fox 9 Sunday. Gallery could be a place. Fox could be a target or a time. 9 was likely a time. Sunday was the day. Frank looked at the calendar on his refrigerator. Today was Tuesday. Sunday was 5 days away. He felt a sudden surge of adrenaline that made his hands shake. He was a quality control inspector. He worried about gasket tolerances and rust prevention. He did not worry about secret messages. The logical part of his brain told him to throw the manual in the trash. It was probably a prank by a typesetter, a joke among print shop workers. But Frank Miller hadn't survived 20 years in American manufacturing by ignoring the details. He knew that when a pattern emerged, it had a cause. And in 1979, with the news full of proxy wars and missile treaties, Gallery Fox didn't sound like a printer's prank. It sounded like an operation. He returned to the table. He needed to verify this. He needed to know if this was an isolated incident or if the pattern repeated. He remembered the stack of manuals on his desk. He had only taken one. There were 50 more in that box, and there were dozens of boxes in the warehouse. He had to go back. Not tonight. The plant was locked down, patrolling by security guards who were retired cops with nothing better to do than check badges. But tomorrow Frank wouldn't just be checking for ink smudges. He would be checking for a conspiracy. Wednesday morning at the plant felt different. The noise seemed louder, the shadows longer. Frank clocked in at 6:55 a.m., keeping his head down. He felt as though the word SPI was stamped on his forehead in red ink. He went straight to his cage. The crate of manuals was still there. He didn't rush. He poured his coffee, arranged his pencils, and waited for the foreman to walk past. When the coast was clear, he pulled the second manual. Page 14. He pulled his micrometer out, pretending to measure the paper thickness, but his eyes were scanning the spacing. Wide, narrow. It was the same. Gallery Fox 9 Sunday. He checked 10 manuals. They were all identical. This was a mass production communication. Whoever put this message in the text intended for it to be seen by someone who had access to these books. At lunch, Frank didn't go to the cafeteria. He walked out to his car, a faded blue Ford sedan, and drove to the public library downtown. He needed to understand the references. The library was a sanctuary of dust and silence. Frank went to the reference section. He pulled a street map of Dayton and a map of the greater Ohio area. He looked for anything named gallery. There was a gallery of fine arts. There was a gallery street in a residential neighborhood. There was a shopping center called the Gallery Mall. Gallery Fox. He checked the phone book. No Fox listed under gallery. He went to the microfilm readers. He started scrolling through recent newspapers, looking for anything that might connect Sterling Industries, the export deal, or the print shop to something unusual. He found a small article from 3 months ago in the Dayton Daily News. Local manufacturer expands trade with East. Sterling Industries signs lucrative deal to supply agricultural pumps to the Hungarian Ministry of Agriculture. It was a fluff piece, talking about jobs and the local economy. But there was a photo. It showed the plant manager, Mr. Henderson, shaking hands with a trade delegation. There were 4 men in the delegation. They were dressed in gray suits that looked ill-fitting compared to Henderson's tailored navy blazer. Frank peered at the grainy image on the screen. In the background, behind the shaking hands, stood a man Frank recognized. He wasn't part of the delegation. He was standing near the loading dock door in the photo, looking away from the camera. It was a man who worked at Sterling. Frank knew him as Victor. Victor was a maintenance guy, a janitor mostly. He fixed the plumbing, mopped the floors, emptied the trash bins in the executive offices. Frank had never spoken to Victor. Victor was one of those people who existed in the periphery of the factory, a ghost in a gray jumpsuit. Why was the janitor standing so close to a high-level diplomatic photo op? And why was he looking at the photographer with an expression that looked less like curiosity and more like assessment? Frank printed the article. The machine whirred and spat out a damp, sour-smelling copy. He drove back to the plant, his mind racing. Gallery. What if it wasn't a name? What if it was a code for a location inside the plant? The plant was divided into zones. The foundry, the assembly line, the paint shop, the warehouse. There was a storage area on the upper mezzanine above the administrative offices. It was an old observation deck from the 1940s, back when the plant made tank engines and the government wanted armed guards watching the floor. It was rarely used now, mostly for storing old tax records and broken furniture. The workers called it the gallery. Frank felt a chill. The gallery. Fox. Fox could be a person, or a frequency, or a specific spot. 9 Sunday. 9 a.m., 9 p.m. On Sunday. The plant was closed on Sundays. The only people there were security and the maintenance crew. Victor was maintenance. Frank pulled into the factory lot. The shift was halfway over. He felt a sudden, terrifying clarity. He was holding a piece of a puzzle that could get him fired, or worse. These codes were being distributed in official manuals. That meant someone at the print shop was involved. or someone had altered the proofs before they went to the printer. And the message pointed to a meeting, this coming Sunday, at the plant. Frank realized he had a choice. He could go to Mr. Henderson. He could go to the police, but who would believe him? He was a quality control guy talking about kerning and old nicknames for storage lofts. They would think he was cracking up. They would look at his lonely life, his ham radio, his quiet demeanor, and they would see a paranoid eccentric. No, he needed proof. He needed to see what happened on Sunday. Thursday and Friday were exercises in agonizing patience. Frank went through the motions of his job, but his focus was fractured. Every time he saw Victor pushing his broom down the aisle, Frank's heart hammered against his ribs. Victor was a man of indeterminate age, perhaps 50, with thick, calloused hands and a face that seemed carved from granite. He spoke little English, or pretended to. He nodded when spoken to, grunted when asked to move a box. He was the perfect invisible man. Frank started paying attention to the trash. Not the literal trash, but the flow of paper. He noticed that Victor didn't just empty the bins, he sorted them. On Friday afternoon, Frank stayed late. He pretended to be catching up on a backlog of inspection reports. The factory floor emptied out, the roar of the machines dying down to the hum of the ventilation fans. The cleaning crew arrived. From his cage, through the wire mesh, Frank watched. He saw Victor enter the main administrative office, Mr. Henderson's office. The lights were off. Victor turned on a single desk lamp. He wasn't emptying the trash. He was standing by the filing cabinet. Frank held his breath. He was 50 yards away, hidden in the gloom of the factory floor. Victor pulled a file, opened it, and laid it on the desk. Then he pulled something from his pocket. It was small. A camera, a Minox. Frank had seen them in spy movies, but he'd never seen one in real life. It was tiny, silver, smaller than a pack of gum. Victor snapped 2 pictures. He closed the file, returned it to the cabinet, and turned off the lamp. He picked up the trash can and walked out, his posture slumping back into the weary shape of the janitor. Frank sat frozen in his chair. This wasn't just a code in a manual. This was active espionage. Victor was stealing industrial secrets. Sterling's new pumps utilized a specific high-pressure seal technology that was patented, something that improved efficiency by 40%. It wasn't nuclear launch codes, but in the economic warfare of the Cold War, industrial efficiency was a weapon. If the Soviets could clone Sterling's technology, they could undercut American exports, saving millions in hard currency. But Gallery Fox 9 Sunday suggested something more than just photographing files. You didn't need a meeting in a deserted factory loft to hand over a roll of film. You could do that at a bus stop or a park bench. A meeting inside the plant meant they needed to move something bigger than film, or they needed to do something to the facility. Frank waited 30 minutes after Victor left before he dared to move. He packed his bag. He took the manual, the evidence, home with him. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He paced his living room. He turned on his ham radio, listening to the static, the chatter of truckers and hobbyists. He spun the dial, searching for something, anything that felt like a connection. He found a number station. It was faint, buried in the static on a shortwave frequency. A mechanical female voice reading groups of 5 numbers. 5, 1, 0, 0, 3. He wondered if Victor was listening to the same station. He wondered if the manual was the key to decoding those numbers. He opened the manual again. He looked at the serial numbers of the parts listed on page 14. Valve assembly, 5103X. The hair on his arms stood up. The number station was broadcasting part numbers, or the part numbers were the cipher key for the broadcast. It was a loop. The manual provided the schedule, Sunday, and the location, Gallery. The radio provided the instructions. The factory provided the cover. Frank realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. He was a nobody, a guy who checked gaskets, and he had just stumbled into a mechanism that spanned continents. He needed help, but he couldn't call the FBI. Not yet. If he was wrong, he destroyed his life. If he was right and there was a mole in the FBI, he had read enough thrillers to know that was a possibility. He was dead. He had to be the witness. He had to be the camera. Sunday morning broke gray and wet. A cold drizzle washed the soot from the factory windows. Frank parked his car 3 blocks away, in the lot of a closed diner. He wore dark coveralls and a wool cap. He carried a thermos of coffee and a pair of binoculars he used for bird watching. He approached the Sterling plant from the rear, along the railroad tracks that brought the raw steel in. The fence there had a gap, a spot where the chain link had curled up. The kids from the neighborhood used it to sneak in and smoke cigarettes. Frank knew about it because he'd reported it 3 times, and maintenance, Victor, had never fixed it. Now Frank realized that wasn't laziness. It was an exit strategy. Frank slipped under the fence. The wet grass soaked his knees. He moved toward the building, hugging the brick wall. He knew the side door near the compressor room had a faulty latch. If you pulled it hard enough, the magnetic lock would pop. He reached the door. He pulled. It groaned, then clicked open. He was in. The factory was a tomb on Sundays. The machines were silent, which made them look like sleeping beasts. The air was cold. The heat was turned down for the weekend. Frank moved softly, his rubber-soled boots making no sound on the concrete. He made his way up the metal staircase to the mezzanine. He had to get to a vantage point where he could see the gallery, the old observation deck. He found a spot behind a stack of air filter crates on a walkway that overlooked the main floor and had a line of sight to the gallery entrance. He settled in. It was 8:15 a.m. He waited. At 8:45, the sound of a door opening echoed through the cavernous space. Footsteps. Heavy, confident footsteps. Frank peered through the gap in the crates. It was Mr. Henderson, the plant manager. Frank was confused. Was Henderson the contact? Was the janitor meeting the boss? Henderson walked to the middle of the floor. He was carrying a briefcase. He looked at his watch. He paced. He looked nervous. He kept wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. At 8:55, another door opened. The rear loading bay. Victor entered. He wasn't wearing his gray jumpsuit. He was wearing a dark raincoat and a flat cap. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. He walked with a military precision. He walked straight up to Henderson. He didn't bow or nod. He stood toe-to-toe with the man who signed the paychecks. "You have it?" Victor asked. His English was perfect. No accent. Or rather, a very slight, clipped accent that wasn't the clumsy peasant voice he used during the week. "I have it," Henderson said. His voice shook. "This is the last time, Victor. I can't do this anymore. The auditors are coming next month. They'll notice the inventory discrepancies. You will do it as long as we require, Robert," Victor said. "Unless you want the photographs of your weekend in Chicago to be mailed to your wife and to the board of directors." Henderson flinched. "Just take it." Henderson handed the briefcase to Victor. Victor opened it. He pulled out a sheaf of blueprints. These weren't pump schematics. They were larger. Frank squinted through his binoculars. They looked like guidance system layouts. Sterling Industries didn't make guidance systems, but Sterling was a subcontractor for a larger defense conglomerate. They made the hydraulic actuators that steered things like missiles. "The specifications for the new prototypes," Victor said, tracing a line on the blue paper. "Good. And the modification kits?" "They're in the shipping crates, marked for Budapest, just like you said. Crate numbers 404 through 410. "Excellent." Victor closed the briefcase. The manual codes worked. "You will receive the next instruction set in the February printing run." "I don't want to know," Henderson said. "That is wise." Victor turned to leave. He walked toward the gallery stairs. Frank stopped breathing. Victor wasn't leaving. He was going up to the gallery. Why? Victor climbed the stairs to the observation deck. He walked to the far wall where an old electrical panel was mounted. He pulled a screwdriver from his coat. He opened the panel. He placed the briefcase inside the wall cavity behind the panel. It was a dead drop. He wasn't taking the documents out of the plant. He was leaving them for someone else. A courier. Fox. Victor was the facilitator. Henderson was the source. But Fox was someone else. Someone who would come to collect. Frank realized the complexity of it. The manual told the courier when to pick it up. Sunday at 9. Victor came back down the stairs. He nodded to Henderson. "Go home, Robert. Watch football. Be normal." Victor left through the loading bay. Henderson waited 5 minutes, then left through the front offices. Silence returned to the factory. Frank lay behind the crates, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would echo off the steel beams. He couldn't leave yet. If Fox was coming, he had to see who it was. Time stretched. 9:30. 10 Fang. Frank's legs were cramping. The cold was seeping into his bones. Had he misunderstood? Was Victor the Fox? No. Victor had left the briefcase. At 10:15, a sound came from the roof. There was a skylight above the gallery. It was old, covered in grime. Frank heard the scrape of metal on metal, a latch being worked from the outside. A rope dropped down. A figure descended. This person was dressed in black, agile, athletic. They landed on the gallery deck with the grace of a gymnast. Frank raised his binoculars. The figure moved to the electrical panel. They opened it, retrieved the briefcase. Then the figure turned. They pulled off their hood. It was a woman. Frank recognized her. It was Miss Carlyle. She was the secretary for the logistics department, the one who brought birthday cakes for the staff, the one who organized the Christmas party. She was young, maybe 28, with a smile that everyone said brightened up the office. She opened the briefcase, checked the contents, and then, in a move that shocked Frank, she pulled a small radio transmitter from her belt. She keyed it. Package secured. Site clear. Moving to exfiltration. Her voice was cold, professional, American accent. She wasn't a Soviet, or maybe she was a sleeper agent raised here, or maybe a mercenary. She attached the briefcase to a harness on her back. She grabbed the rope and began to climb back up toward the skylight. Frank shifted his weight. His boot scraped against the metal walkway. Scritch. The sound was tiny, but in the silence of the factory it was a gunshot. Miss Carlyle stopped climbing. She hung suspended 10 feet above the deck. She turned her head, scanning the darkness of the factory floor. She didn't look panicked. She looked like a predator scanning for movement. Frank froze. He didn't blink. He became part of the crate. She stared right at his hiding spot for 10 seconds. Then slowly she pulled a pistol from a holster at her waist. A silenced pistol. She didn't fire. She just held it, aiming into the shadows. "Clear," she whispered to herself, apparently deciding it was just the building settling. She holstered the weapon and finished her climb. The rope was pulled up. The skylight closed. Frank let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He waited another hour before he moved. He crawled backward all the way to the stairwell. He went down, out the side door, under the fence, and back to his car. He sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles were white. He had the whole picture now, or at least the mechanics of it. The codes in the manual triggered the drop. Henderson provided the intel. Victor managed the site. Miss Carlyle was the courier. It was a cell. A perfect, self-contained espionage cell operating out of a pump factory in Dayton. And Frank Miller, the man who just wanted to ensure the margins were correct on page 14, was the only person on Earth who knew about it. He started the car. He didn't go home. He drove toward the highway. He needed to get out of Dayton for a few hours. He needed to think. But as he merged onto I-75, he looked in his rearview mirror. A gray sedan was 2 cars back. It changed lanes when he did. Paranoia? Or had the ghost in the machine seen him after all? Frank Miller realized then that the Cold War wasn't just in Berlin or Moscow. It was right here, in the rearview mirror of a Ford on a rainy Sunday in Ohio. And he was no longer a spectator. He was a target. The rearview mirror of Frank's 1974 Ford Galaxy was a rectangle of glass that currently contained his entire future. The gray sedan was there, hovering 2 car lengths back, a shark in the highway current. It was a nondescript vehicle, likely a Chevrolet or a Dodge, the kind of car chosen specifically because it vanished into the background of American macadam. But the behavior was wrong. When Frank sped up to 65, the sedan matched him. When he drifted into the right lane behind a lumbering semi-truck, the sedan tucked in behind him, refusing to pass. Frank's hands were slick on the steering wheel. He wasn't a man of action. He was a man of specifications and tolerances. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a biological discord that drowned out the hum of the tires. He realized with a jolt of nausea that he had brought the manual with him. It was in his bag on the passenger seat. If they stopped him, if they ran him off the road, they would find the manual with his notes. They would find the cipher key. He needed to get off the interstate. Interstate 75 was a chute, a trap with no exits, but the ones the engineers had designed. He needed the chaotic geometry of the back roads. Frank saw the exit for Tip City approaching. He signaled left, pretending to move into the passing lane. Then, at the last possible second, he swerved hard to the right, cutting across the Gore Point, the striped triangle of pavement separating the highway from the ramp. His tires squealed, a sound that seemed to tear the Sunday quiet in half. The heavy suspension of the Ford wallowed, dipping dangerously, but the car held the road. He glanced at the mirror. The gray sedan had been caught off guard. It swerved, trying to follow, but a speeding station wagon in the right lane blocked it. Frank saw the gray nose dip as the driver slammed on the brakes, but the exit was gone. They had missed it. Frank didn't celebrate. He knew professionals wouldn't just give up. They would take the next exit and double back. They would guess his trajectory. He drove deep into the grid of county roads that crisscrossed the farmland north of Dayton. The corn had been harvested, leaving miles of broken yellow stalks rotting in the mud. The landscape was flat, exposed and gray under the weeping sky. Frank drove for an hour, taking random turns, watching the horizon for the silhouette of the gray car. He finally pulled into a gravel lot behind a tractor repair shop that looked closed for the season. He killed the engine. The silence that rushed back into the car was deafening. He was 42 years old. He had a mortgage, a pension plan, and a recipe for meatloaf he made every Thursday. Now he was hiding behind a tractor shed because he knew how to read typesetting errors. The absurdity of it made him want to laugh, but the fear strangled the sound in his throat. He opened the manual. Gallery Fox 9 Sunday. It was done. The event had passed. But Victor had said something else to Henderson. You will receive the next instruction set in the February printing run. February was 4 months away. But the crates, the Budapest crates, numbers 404 through 410, were already packed. They contained the modification kits. Frank knew what that meant now. They weren't pumps. They were technology transfers. Maybe gyroscope components, maybe alloy samples, maybe guidance chips hidden inside the cast iron housings of the pumps. Frank looked at the manual again. He realized he couldn't go home. If they were following him, they knew his car. If they knew his car, they knew his license plate. If they knew his plate, they knew where he lived. Victor, the man who emptied his trash can every day, certainly knew where he lived. He needed a phone, but not his phone, and not a payphone near his house. He waited until dusk settled, turning the cornfields into a sea of ink. Then he drove to a truck stop on the outskirts of Springfield. He went to the bank of payphones near the restrooms. The air smelled of diesel and fried onions. He didn't call the police. The local police played poker with Henderson. He remembered seeing them at the company picnics. He dialed the operator. I need the number for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Cincinnati field office. The FBI field office in Cincinnati was a fortress of brick and bureaucracy. Frank arrived at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, having slept in his car in a hospital parking lot. The only place he figured a sleeping man wouldn't attract attention. He was unshaven, his clothes were rumpled, and he smelled of stale coffee. The receptionist was a woman behind bulletproof glass who looked at him with the weary skepticism of someone who dealt with walk-ins, claiming to be targeted by Martian death rays on a weekly basis. I have information regarding industrial espionage and the violation of export controls involving defense technologies, Frank said. He had rehearsed the sentence 100 times on the drive down. He tried to keep his voice steady, but it cracked on the word defense. Fill out this form, sir. An agent will be with you if one is available, she said, sliding a clipboard through the slot. Frank didn't take the clipboard. He pressed the manual against the glass. He opened it to page 14. Tell the agent to look at the kerning. Tell him to look up Gallery Fox. And tell him that Sterling Industries is shipping missile guidance components to Hungary. The woman paused. She looked at Frank's eyes. They were red-rimmed and terrified. But they weren't crazy. There was a desperate lucidity in them. She picked up her phone. 20 minutes later, Frank was in a small, windowless interview room. The table was bolted to the floor. The mirror on the wall was obviously one-way glass. The man who entered didn't look like a spy hunter. He looked like an accountant who had been in a fist fight. He was balding, wore a short-sleeved dress shirt with a tie, and had a scar running through his left eyebrow. "Mr. Miller," the man said, sitting down. "I'm Agent Sullivan. You mentioned missile components." Frank laid it all out. He didn't embellish. He spoke with the precision of a quality control inspector. He explained the manual. He showed the code. He described the spacing. He detailed the scene in the gallery, the briefcase, the wall panel, Miss Carlyle, the rope, the Minox camera. Agent Sullivan listened without interrupting. He took notes on a yellow legal pad. When Frank described the typesetting anomaly, Sullivan stopped him. "Show me," Sullivan said. Frank walked him through the binary pattern of the spaces. Wide, narrow, wide. Sullivan stared at the page for a long time. Then he looked up. "You figured this out because the spacing was wrong?" "It's my job," Frank said. "I check for defects." Sullivan closed the notepad. "We've been looking for a leak in the guidance program for 18 months. We knew the technology was getting out. We suspected it was coming from a subcontractor, but Sterling makes water pumps. They weren't even on the list." "They are now," Frank said. "The crates, 404 through 410. They're marked for Budapest. Victor said they're in the warehouse." Sullivan stood up. "Mr. Miller, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are in a very dangerous situation. These people, Victor, Carlyle, they aren't amateurs. If they suspect you know, they will kill you. That gray sedan you saw, that was a cleanup crew." "I can't go back," Frank said, his voice rising. "I can't go back there." "You have to," Sullivan said. The room went cold. Frank stared at the agent. "What? We can't raid the place based on the word of a tired man and a typo in a manual. We need to catch them with the goods. We need to verify the contents of those crates before they leave the secure area. If we raid now and the crates are empty, or just contain pumps, we blow the investigation and they go underground. We need you to go back to work." "They followed me," Frank whispered. "We'll cover you. We'll have a team on you 24/7. But you need to clock in tomorrow. You need to be Frank Miller, the guy who checks the manuals. If you disappear, they'll know the leak is blown, and they'll dump the cargo." Frank felt the walls closing in. He wanted to scream. He wanted to demand protection. But he looked at Sullivan's face and saw the cold calculus of the Cold War. Individuals didn't matter. The technology mattered. "What do I have to do?" Frank asked. "Go to work, act normal, and confirm the location of those crates. Don't touch them. Just verify they are where Victor said they were." Walking back into the Sterling plant on Tuesday morning was the hardest thing Frank had ever done. It felt like walking into the mouth of a furnace. Every noise made him flinch. The hiss of the pneumatic tools sounded like silenced gunshots. The shadows in the rafters looked like Miss Carlyle waiting with a rope. He clocked in at 6:55 a.m. He went to his cage. The stack of manuals was still there. At 10 a.m. the coffee cart came around. Miss Carlyle was with it. Usually the coffee lady came alone, but today, Miss Carlyle, the athletic, lethal courier from the rafters, was walking with her, holding a clipboard. She was wearing a beige skirt and a floral blouse. Her hair was pulled back in a sensible bun. She looked like a librarian. She stopped at Frank's cage. "Good morning, Frank," she said. Her voice was bright, cheerful. It was the voice of the woman who organized the Secret Santa. "We missed you yesterday. Someone said you were out sick?" Frank looked up from his desk. His hands were trembling under the table. He forced them to be still. He looked at her face. He looked for the killer he had seen in the dark. He saw only polite concern. "Yes," Frank lied. "Stomach bug. Ate something bad on Sunday." "Oh, that's terrible," she said. She leaned in slightly, her eyes scanning his desk. "Well, we're glad you're back. We're doing a potluck on Friday for Mr. Henderson's birthday. You'll be there, right?" "I wouldn't miss it," Frank said. She smiled. It was a dazzling smile, and it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were flat, assessing, reptilian. She knew, or she suspected. She was probing him, testing his reactions. "See you there," she said, and walked away. Frank exhaled, his breath shuddering out of him. He looked down at his clipboard. He had successfully inspected 0 items in 3 hours. He had to check the warehouse. The warehouse was on the other side of the facility. He needed a reason to go there. He picked up a rejected tag. He grabbed a hydraulic valve from his desk, a part he had actually failed last week. He would claim he needed to return it to the scrap bin in the rear loading dock. He walked across the factory floor. He felt eyes on his back. He glanced at the catwalks. Nothing. He glanced at the maintenance closet. The door was ajar. He reached the warehouse section. It was a cavernous space stacked high with wooden crates. Forklifts buzzed back and forth like angry hornets. He scanned the rows. Row 4, row 5. He found the shipment staging area. There were dozens of crates marked with stenciled letters. Destination, Budapest, via Hamburg. He walked down the line, pretending to look for the scrap bin. He read the numbers burned into the wood. 401, 402, 403. There they were, 404 through 410. They looked identical to the others. Same wood, same metal banding. But Frank noticed something. The inspection seals, the wax stamps that he was supposed to apply, were already there. He hadn't stamped them. He stepped closer. He looked at the seal on crate 404. It bore his signature, F. Miller. It was a forgery, a perfect forgery. He felt a wave of dizziness. They didn't just use his manuals. They used his name. If this shipment was caught by customs without the FBI's intervention, Frank Miller would be the one going to prison. He was the fall guy, the patsy. Lost Frank? The voice came from behind a stack of pallets. Frank froze. He turned slowly. Victor was standing there. He was leaning on a broom, but his posture was loose, ready. He wasn't the hunched janitor. He was the man from the Sunday meeting. Just looking for the scrap bin, Victor." Frank stammered. "This valve. The threading is stripped." Victor looked at the valve in Frank's hand. Then he looked at the crates. Then he looked into Frank's eyes. "The scrap bin is in Bay 2, Victor said softly. "This is the export bay. Very sensitive, very expensive. We wouldn't want any accidents here." "Right," Frank said. "Bay 2, sorry." "Frank," Victor said. Frank stopped. "You look tired. You should sleep more. Men who are tired make mistakes, and in this factory, mistakes can be fatal." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Frank nodded and walked away. He didn't run. He forced his legs to move at a walking pace. He felt Victor's gaze burning a hole between his shoulder blades until he turned the corner. Frank met Agent Sullivan that night in a diner 10 miles out of town. Sullivan was eating a slice of cherry pie. "They're there," Frank said, sliding into the booth. "Crates 404 to 410, and they forged my signature on the inspection seals." Sullivan nodded. "Good. That confirms intent. We're setting up the raid for Friday. We'll hit them when the trucks arrive to load the shipment." "Friday?" Frank hissed. "That's 3 days away. Victor knows I saw the crates. Miss Carlyle is watching me like a hawk. We need the trucks, Frank. We need to catch the transport network, not just the guys in the factory. If we seize the crates now, the drivers get spooked and disappear. We need the whole chain. I might be dead by Friday," Frank said. "You won't be. We have a car outside your house. We have a man in the parking lot at work. Does the man in the parking lot know about the trapdoor in the roof? Or the tunnel under the foundry?" Frank asked. He didn't know if those things existed, but he was making a point. "These people are ghosts, Sullivan. Just hold it together for 72 hours. Wednesday passed in a blur of anxiety. Thursday came. On Thursday afternoon, Frank was at his desk when he saw movement in the shipping bay. The large bay doors were rolling up. 2 semi-trucks were backing in. They weren't the usual Sterling transport trucks. They were unmarked, dark blue cabs with mud-splattered trailers. Frank looked at the clock. 2:00 p.m. on Thursday. The pickup wasn't scheduled for Friday. They were moving it up. He stood up. He looked around for the foreman. Kowalski was nowhere to be seen. He saw Mr. Henderson on the floor, pointing at the Budapest crates. He was talking to the drivers. He looked agitated. He was waving his arms, hurrying them. Victor was there too, operating the forklift. He was moving crate 404 toward the truck. They were leaving. Now. Frank ran to the payphone in the break room. He dialed the number Sullivan had given him. "Circuit busy," the operator's voice droned. He slammed the phone down. He tried again. Busy. He realized the phone line was dead. Or cut. He looked out the window. The man in the parking lot that Sullivan had promised, a sedan that had been parked near the gate all morning, was gone. Had he gone for a coffee? Had he been compromised? Frank was alone. The FBI was expecting a Friday raid. In 20 minutes, the guidance systems for the next generation of Soviet missiles would be on the highway, and once they hit the interstate, they would vanish into the stream of commerce, headed for a port, then a ship, then the Iron Curtain. Frank Miller, the man of tolerances, realized he had to create an intolerance. He had to create a failure. He couldn't fight Victor. He couldn't stop a truck. He couldn't shoot anyone. But he knew the machines. He ran out of the break room and down the back stairs to the compressor control room. This was the heart of the factory's pneumatic system. It powered the air tools, the lifts, and the massive hydraulic clamps used in the shipping bay to secure the crates to the pallets. The room was hot, filled with the roar of the massive intake turbines. Frank looked at the main pressure manifold. There was a safety valve. If the pressure dropped below a certain PSI, the system would trigger an automatic lockdown of the hydraulic lifts. It was a safety feature designed to prevent loads from dropping if a line burst. If he tripped it, the forklifts in the shipping bay would freeze. They wouldn't be able to lift the crates into the trucks. But there was a problem. The valve was locked. It required a manager's key. Frank looked around. He grabbed a heavy wrench from the tool board. He didn't have a key, but he had leverage. He jammed the wrench into the valve wheel. He pulled. It didn't budge. He thought about page 14. He thought about the forged signature. He thought about the gray sedan trying to kill him on the highway. He thought about his wife, Sarah, and how she used to tell him that he was the stubbornest man alive. He roared, a sound that was lost in the turbine noise, and threw his entire weight against the wrench. Metal screamed, the lock sheared, the wheel spun. A hiss started, low at first, then rising to a shriek. The pressure gauge needle plummeted. 120 psi, 90, 60. Whoosh! The emergency venting system kicked in. Sirens began to wail throughout the plant. Frank dropped the wrench and ran. He had to get to the floor to see if it worked. He burst out onto the mezzanine. Chaos. In the shipping bay, Victor's forklift had stalled mid-lift. The crate 404, was suspended 3 feet off the ground, wobbling. The hydraulic arms had locked up, refusing to go up or down. The truck drivers were shouting. Mr. Henderson was running in circles, clutching his head. Victor was slamming his fist against the forklift's control panel. Then he stopped. He looked up. He looked toward the compressor room. He looked at the mezzanine. He saw Frank. Victor didn't hesitate. He jumped off the forklift. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. A real gun, not a silenced one. A heavy, black automatic. He pointed it at Frank. Frank ducked behind a pillar just as a bullet chipped the concrete next to his ear. The sound was distinct, sharp, cutting through the wail of the sirens. The workers on the floor screamed and scattered. This wasn't a drill. Frank scrambled on his hands and knees along the catwalk. He needed to get to the fire alarm. The pressure siren was just noise. The fire alarm would summon the fire department and the police. It would bring the world to the factory. He reached the alarm box. He smashed the glass with his elbow. He pulled the lever. The strobes ignited. The second siren joined the first. Frank looked down. Victor was running up the stairs. He was coming for the kill. He wasn't a janitor anymore. He was a soldier clearing a position. Frank ran toward the gallery. It was a dead end, but it was the only place to go. He needed to buy time. He burst into the gallery. It was empty. The skylight was closed. The rope was gone. He heard Victor's heavy boots on the metal stairs. Clang, clang, clang. Frank looked around for a weapon. There was nothing, just dust and old chairs. Then he saw the electrical panel, the dead drop. He ripped the panel open. The wires were exposed. Frank Miller wasn't a fighter, but he was an electrician. He grabbed the two main leads, 220 volts of industrial current. He stripped the insulation with his teeth, spitting out the plastic. His mouth tasted of copper and blood. Victor kicked the door open. He stood there, chest heaving, the gun raised. "You are a very annoying little man," Victor said. He raised the gun to aim at Frank's chest. "Page 14, Frank said. The spacing was wrong." Victor sneered. "Goodbye, Mr. Miller." Frank took the two live wires and jammed them against the metal doorframe he was standing next to. The arc flash was blinding. A thunderclap of ionized air exploded in the small room. The current surged through the metal frame, through the floor grating. It didn't electrocute Victor. He was wearing rubber-soled work boots. But the flash blinded him. He fired wildly, the bullet hitting the ceiling. He stumbled back, shielding his eyes. Frank took the opportunity. He tackled the big man. It wasn't a graceful tackle. It was a desperate collision of mass. They hit the floor. The gun skittered away. Victor was stronger, much stronger. He threw Frank off like a rag doll. Frank hit the wall, the breath knocked out of him. Victor blinked, tears streaming from his flash-blinded eyes. He pulled a knife from his boot. He lunged. Crash. The skylight above them shattered. Glass rained down. A rope uncoiled. But it wasn't Miss Carlyle. Men in black tactical gear dropped through the glass. "FBI! Drop the weapon!" Victor froze. He looked at the knife. He looked at the 3 MP5 submachine guns pointed at his head. He dropped the knife. Agent Sullivan stepped through the door of the gallery, his gun drawn. He looked at Frank, who was slumped against the wall, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "I told you Friday, Frank," Sullivan said, panting. "They changed the schedule," Frank wheezed, "and the kerning was off." The raid was total. The pressure drop had paralyzed the shipment long enough for the tactical teams to breach the perimeter. The 2 trucks were surrounded. The drivers, realizing they were caught, surrendered immediately. They were mercenaries, not ideologues. They weren't paid enough to die. Mr. Henderson was found in his office, shredding documents. He was weeping when they handcuffed him. Miss Carlyle was the only one who put up a fight. She was intercepted in the parking lot, trying to hotwire a secretary's car. She disarmed one agent before being tackled by 3 others. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at them with cold, hard hate. The Budapest crates were opened. Inside the hollowed-out casings of the Model 88K pumps, technicians found the gyroscope assemblies for the Soviet R-36M ICBM. It was billions of dollars of research, stolen piece by piece, ready to be shipped out. Frank sat on the bumper of an ambulance in the parking lot. A paramedic was putting a bandage on his head. The rain had stopped. The sun was trying to break through the gray Ohio clouds. Agent Sullivan walked over. He handed Frank a cup of coffee. "You did good, Frank," Sullivan said. "Stupid, but good." "Did you get the manual?" Frank asked. "We got everything. The manual, the cipher keys, the payroll for the cell. It's the biggest counterintelligence bust in 5 years. What happens now? For them? Decades in federal prison. Maybe a prisoner swap for Carlyle if the Russians want her back bad enough. For me?" Frank asked. Sullivan took a sip of his coffee. "Well, you can't work here anymore. Henderson's out, but the company is going to be under investigation for years. It's going to be a mess. And your face? Victor has friends. You can't stay in Dayton." Frank looked at the factory. It was just a building now. A brick box where he had spent 20 years measuring things. "We have a witness protection program," Sullivan said. "New name, new town, new job. Can I still be an inspector?" Frank asked. "I'm good at it." Sullivan smiled. "Yeah, I think we can find a place that needs someone who pays attention to the details. Maybe somewhere warmer. Arizona?" Frank thought about it. Arizona. No rain, no gray skies, no memories of Sarah in the empty bungalow. "Do they have libraries in Arizona?" Frank asked. "They do." "Okay," Frank said. "Arizona."